Okay, so we're going to get started now. Once again, thank you for being here tonight with us at our town hall. D1, the greatest district of all. We are here tonight and we got a lot of things to talk about, but we're not going to keep you very long. It's a jam-packed meeting and we're going to get it all in quickly for you. So we're going to do what we do. I'm Kim Edwards and I'm from Connecticut, local 1298. And I'm just basically going to remind you once again to mute, be respectful in the chat, and we're going to get started in a minute because we have our agenda. And once again, use that chat function if you need to. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over. It is my honor and pleasure to hand it over to our Vice President, Dennis Trainer, to kick us off. You are up, Dennis.
Well, thank you, Kim, and thank you for hosting tonight. And let me also thank the District 1 staff for helping to put this town hall together. We look forward to doing more of these calls to keep our members informed. Let me begin by thanking all of you so much for joining us tonight. It's great to see so many of you here. These past weeks have been intense, chaotic, and confusing. A lot of us are either completely freaked out or at least annoyed, and I think we can all agree that it has been a lot. I'm sure you have all heard from the term flooding the zone by now. That's what's happening right now. They're overflowing the news cycles with so many things at once. It makes your head spin. It makes it hard to focus on one thing because it's all bad. You cannot keep up with what's going on and you feel like you just got to tune out. This is all part of their plan, and we have to stay focused on what we have the capacity and skills to take on. Let's not take their bait and run around in all different directions trying to fight every fight and chase every distraction. Let's take a deep breath, stay calm, and focus on what's important and effective. That's why we're doing this call tonight. We want you to hear from us what's going on, what's important, and what we're going to do about it. Now, let me address something head on. I know a lot of you here voted for Trump and the Republicans. Many of you represent members who overwhelmingly voted for Trump, and that is your right. But let me be crystal clear about this. We're not here to bash anyone, but we want everyone to understand what's going on, and you might hear things that you that you do not agree with. I want everyone to have an open mind. At our District 1 conference in late November, I talked to the leaders of your locals in District 1, and I explained that we need to have a dialogue with our members. We cannot be afraid to talk to each other, and we as union have to be able to stand up and fight back when we see something wrong. Let me remind everyone of what happened to the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, PATCO, and the entire labor movement 44 years ago. PATCO went on strike, and President Reagan fired them all and banned them from ever being rehired again. And the labor movement stood on the sidelines and did nothing, and the decline of the labor movement began. All employers felt they could do the same thing. And now we're seeing the same thing happen to federal employees who are being fired for no reason at all. We are seeing the National Labor Relations Board members being fired, and now the board unable to do what it needs to do. Elon Musk, who was not voted in by anyone, he's going around firing workers with union contracts. Many of our members listen to just Fox News and are hearing a different slant on what is happening. Tonight, we're going to begin telling you what is happening that are affecting workers and talk about federal cuts and what will affect someone you know. My concern is Trump is moving so fast and he is getting rid of all the guardrails, all the regulations, so he can do whatever he wants. So we need to get involved. We need to educate our members and hope that the members that are here tonight will help us educate those that are not here. We need to stand up and fight back. We saw what happened with PATCO. We saw what happened as employers felt that if the president can do it, they can do it. We cannot allow those employers to think now that Trump is just doing what he wants, that they can do whatever they want. The labor movement has to stand up. You have to get off the sidelines. CWA is ready to do that. And never forget, we are a union. We represent everyone. We will always protect and fight for every one of our members. Our unity and solidarity are more important than anything else. We will do more calls moving forward to make sure you all hear directly from us what's going on. We also want to hear from you, what's important to you, and what you want us to fight for. We launched a survey a few weeks ago, and so far, over 3,000 members have completed it, which is great. And if you haven't yet, you have one more day to do so. We'll put the link to the survey in the chat, or you can scan the QR codes on the screen now. Is the QR code up there? There you go. So scan that code if you haven't already taken the survey. Thank you. On this call tonight, we want to cover two main issues. Number one, the attacks on workers' rights through changes at the National Labor Relations Board and other important agencies for labor. And number two, the harmful cuts coming our way either through ongoing funding freezes or the tax cuts for billionaires that Congress is working on right now.
Can't you watch it?
Now I'm going to pass it on to CWA Deputy Organizing Director Tim Dubenau and District 1 Attorney Nick Hanlon to cover the first part of the agenda. Tim?
Great. Thank you, Dennis. Good evening, sisters and brothers. It's so great to see so many of our members on the call here tonight. I want to talk just for a few minutes in a very concrete way about how our rights as workers and union members are about to be or already have been diminished as a result of recent changes at the federal level. On this call, we have public sector and private sector workers, and as you know, not all of our members fall under the jurisdiction of the National Labor Relations Board, or NLRB. Our airline members generally fall under the Railroad Act, which is enforced by the National Mediation Board, or the NMB, and our public sector members generally work under the various state labor boards, such as PERB in New York and PERC in New Jersey. Changes at the NLRB often eventually affect other labor boards too. So if you're a public sector member or an airline member, the negative changes at the NLRB aren't good for you either. I'm sure you've all seen what's happening at the federal level. Elon Musk and his hostile takeover of federal agencies are basically illegally ripping up and ignoring union contracts for federal workers who are represented by AFGE. Thousands of workers are being laid off across the country, and thousands more are being threatened with termination. They are simply ignoring union contracts. Trump is also going after our brothers and sisters at the Postal Workers Union, many of you have probably seen. The administration just announced they would take over the United States Postal Service, essentially privatizing it. Tens of thousands of workers are now in jeopardy. All these things set a very dangerous precedent for every CWA member and every union member in this country. If they start to rip up union contracts in broad daylight, if they start privatizing public services, it's open season for all union workers and all workers. If these new attacks against union workers and contracts are allowed on the federal level, this is PATCO on steroids, as Dennis alluded to. The main law that gives American workers the right to form, support, and join unions is the National Labor Relations Act. When CWA organizes new workers in the private sector, we turn to the NLRB, to the board, to file for elections. When union workers get fired for protected union activity, when a company refuses to bargain with us in good faith, when employers change our working conditions without bargaining, or when they refuse to hand over vital information during bargaining, the labor board is there to enforce our rights. Organizing more members increases CWA's power, which gives us more leverage to bargain strong contracts. So rigorous enforcement by the labor board allows CWA to grow and negotiate strong union contracts for our members. A strong labor board helps all of us on this call, every single one of us. I will give just one example of how CWA in District 1 has recently used the labor board to protect our rights. And it's a shout out to Syracuse, New York, and I hope there's some eBay workers on the call. In Syracuse, New York, Local 1123 led a successful effort to organize 300 eBay workers. Management did the normal things. They aggressively tried to bust our union, but the labor board had our back. eBay refused to recognize the union, our union, after we won. And after CWA filed an unfair labor practice, or ULP, against eBay, the board forced the company to recognize our full unit. CWA also filed a ULP charge over eBay's illegal surveillance of our members and over their refusal to bargain with CWA on disciplinary issues. As a result of a complaint by the labor board against eBay, we were able to leverage the complaint to force eBay to move on a final critical piece of bargaining, giving us just cause, which everyone on this call knows how important that is, and also expanded Weingarten rights protections, which gives our newest members in Syracuse the right to union representation for any disciplinary meeting. We also forced eBay to give a year's worth of back pay to 2 illegally fired union members, thanks to robust enforcement by the labor board. So this is not just like an academic exercise. This is really like real members benefiting from a strong and robust labor board. Just in District 1, thousands of workers have recently joined our union in the past 4 years under the Jennifer Abbruzzo board. And as many of you know, she's an ex-CWA member who is the General Counsel of the labor board before she got terminated recently. Here's a chart which shows our growth in the past 4 years. Like the rest of CWA and the labor movement, here in District 1, we have gotten bigger and more powerful thanks to the protections at the labor board. Now, just remember, this growth is more, it's significantly more than is typical. And this is just in District 1. I could show you charts from every single sector and district in CWA and expand it out to the labor movement. We've been growing under the Jennifer Abbruzzo board when she was the General Counsel. So this is a good story to tell from a functioning labor board that is now over. Many of our locals have grown recently, and it's thanks to the hard work of our organizers, our locals, the leadership, activists in various units, and of course, the protections we get at the board. During the first Trump presidency, when we had a hostile board, we organized significantly fewer workers than under the pro-union labor board that just ended in January. The simple truth is our future growth, which gives us power, is now in question. And our rights as workers will now be diminished. There's no question. This next chart shows that we are now losing, shows what we are now losing now that the labor board does not have a quorum after Trump illegally fired board member Wilcox. And I'm just going to go through this very quickly. Trump's unlawful firing of board member Wilcox makes things much more difficult for union workers. And these are just 4 examples, and there's many others. If an employer fires a union activist for union activity, if this gets appealed to the full board, the board cannot reinstate the worker or offer back pay. If an employer unilaterally changes working conditions without bargaining, the board cannot order the employer to rescind the change and restore any economic losses suffered by employees now. If an employer refuses to provide a union with information relevant to bargaining or a grievance, the board cannot order the employer to give over the information at the full board. If an employer is surface bargaining, which is like going through the motions of bargaining, but not really intending to bargain, the board cannot order the employer to meet and bargain with the union in good faith. We can still file ULP charges, and the regional level at the board will still investigate them, and the board's ALJ judges will still issue decisions. But any employer can appeal the decision to the full board, and because there's no quorum, because of the illegal termination of Wilcox, it will languish and have no answer. Thank you, Rachel. Many of our locals have grown. Right. That's the slide, and our rights will be diminished. There's no question. Although then I want to end on a little bit of it's been a lot of doom and gloom, but I want to end on a somewhat positive note because I think it's important. It's hard but not hopeless, as other people have said, and although the road will undoubtedly get rockier for all of us, CWA is ready to join together with our allies to fight back to protect our rights. We know our real strength, our solidarity and militancy, and no one can take that away from us. And we will need each other now more than ever, and I have every confidence that we are CWA strong and we're going to fight back together. Thank you for listening. I'm going to pass it on to our attorney, Nick Hanlon, to talk for a few minutes about what's going on at the board in more details and how it affects us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to add on a little bit to what Tim said about the changes at the board. Just by way of background, the board has a general counsel who functions as like a chief prosecutor. That was General Counsel Jennifer Abbruzzo, pictured here. And then it has a 5-member board, which is like a panel of judges. One of them was Gwen Wilcox, pictured here. A few weeks ago, Trump fired General Counsel Abbruzzo, who had been the most aggressively pro-worker, pro-union general counsel in decades, and maybe even in the history of the board. And then he removed board member Wilcox in violation of the law, which provides that NLRB board members can only be removed for cause after a hearing. That was a shocking move, never been done in American history, not just at the board, but at any independent agency. It was shocking in part because Trump did not need to remove Wilcox to take control of the board. There were 2 vacant seats on the 5-member board. There's already 1 Republican on it. He could have simply appointed 2 pro-management, anti-union, anti-worker members like he did in his first term. So why did he remove Wilcox? One was to what Tim mentioned, to make it so the board with less than 3 members now has no quorum, and without a quorum, it has no authority to act to enforce the law. And the other reason is to advance a right-wing legal argument that independent government agencies like the NLRB are unconstitutional. Now, in our system, these independent government agencies are how are the way that we protect consumers, citizens, and workers from corporate abuse. So basically, to say they're unconstitutional means there are no longer protections for workers, for the environment, for consumers, for citizens. In asserting his authority to fire board members, Trump is parroting arguments made by Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos in their efforts to crush unionizing efforts at campaigns at SpaceX, Tesla, and Amazon. Each of these companies currently has cases in federal court arguing that the National Labor Relations Act, the law that gives workers rights to form unions and compels employers to deal with unions, arguing that this law is unconstitutional. And now Trump has triggered a case by firing Wilcox to make the same argument. If Trump, Amazon, SpaceX win, the NLRB will cease to exist as an independent agency and could cease to exist altogether, depending how the court rules. So without a quorum, this is just a term to say that the number of members of body needs to take any action legally. Without a quorum, the board has no legal authority to act. In a very real sense, the NLRA has been indefinitely suspended by the Trump administration. Tim mentioned a number of things that can't happen now. There are at the regional level, the board should continue to function, but we're seeing employers attack that, saying Amazon again, Whole Foods recently organized in Philadelphia. They won their election, and then before Trump fired Wilcox, and now 10 days after the election, the board's going to certify the victory by the union, and Amazon is arguing, oh, the board can't certify it because that power comes from the 5-member panel, and that 5-member panel doesn't exist right now. So, that'll be settled in court, but it's an invitation, just like the PATCO air traffic controllers firing that Dennis and Tim mentioned. This is an invitation by Trump for employers to become aggressive, for employers to go on the attack, that the government has their back, not the backs of working people. At some point, Trump will probably appoint 5 anti-worker members to the board, but right now it just seems like he's going to leave it decapitated and powerless. He did appoint a new acting general counsel. This new general counsel has already issued an order rescinding all the pro-union policies that were put in place by Abbruzzo. Many of these have immediate effects. Some of them they will need to bring cases in front of the board to get the board to make a ruling like a court to change the precedent. 3 areas where they are going to be seeking to reverse pro-union policies. There are dozens of these. There are dozens of the things that have immediate effect, but I'm just going to give 3 quick examples. The Biden board had found that mandatory anti-unions are generally, in most cases, unlawful. They're going to seek to have that reversed. The CMEX doctrine, which is where the Biden board found that employers have to recognize and bargain with unions, where a union narrowly loses an election because of the employer's egregious violations of the law. They're going to seek to reverse that. And the Biden board found that employers can't make unilateral changes to healthcare plans, healthcare benefits while bargaining. They're going to seek to undo that. All 3 of these precedents directly affected CWA in the past few years. Employers were clearly far more hesitant to violate the law because they wanted to avoid a CMEX bargaining order. They were more careful and less aggressive in holding anti-union meetings and in their campaigns generally. And one very specific example, while we were negotiating a first contract at the Audubon Society, the employer unilaterally changed its healthcare plan, which resulted in dramatically higher out-of-pocket costs for our members. Under the precedent that was in effect at the time that had been set by the previous Trump board, that was perfectly legal. However, Abbruzzo was seeking a change in that law, and because of that, the NLRB issued a complaint against the employer, which helped us, which we then settled to get a contract on our terms, and eventually the board, in a different case, ruled to change the law and to prevent employers from making such changes and undermine union bargaining strength. Trump's GC has already reversed course on this policy and is going to be seeking to get it changed as soon as there is a full board to change it. The bottom line is it's a new day for employers, and we're going to see more aggressive conduct from management, and there's very little incentive for employers to follow the law. The only real problem over the past few years at the Biden board, as we call it, is that it was so severely understaffed that it took longer than ever to resolve cases. Like much of the federal workforce, which hasn't grown in 50 years, despite the population growing by 2/3, the NLRB was asked to do more and more with less and less. Which we're seeing in this slide here is a tweet from this is from the union that represents workers at the National Labor Relations Board, the federal employees there. And they've just been gotten an order to draw up plans for a reduction in force. I mean, this is absolutely insane. They are so understaffed. They are so overburdened. I mean, it has just been, I've been dealing with them for the past few years. I mean, they used to be you filed a charge and you get a call back the next day. Now you'll call them, and they'll say, look, I'm sorry, I have the next 6 months scheduled out. Can we talk in a few months? So it's not a time to be cutting staff at the NLRB. It's a time they should be tripling the number of workers there. The NLRB and every other agency which protects workers' rights, the EEOC, the Department of Labor, including the Wage and Hour Division and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, with these personnel cuts, they will not be able to function. The Trump administration is essentially repealing laws that Congress has passed to protect workers by making them impossible to enforce. I'll just echo Tim's happy note there. I'm going to borrow his. I do also want to note a happy note, but we've got to move on. And I'm going to pass it now over to Area Director Halen Choi to go over a few other changes.
Thank you, Nick. Good evening, sisters and brothers. Wow, it's so good to be with all of you tonight. And, remember, no matter what's going on, we have to stick together as a union family. So I know this was a lot. We've put together a flyer that explains what the NLRB is and what these changes mean for us, and we will link it in the chat along with a toolkit that contains social media images that you can use. So please continue sharing this information. We want to make sure that all of our members know what's going on. So we're going to link this in the chat. It's a flyer that explains what the NLRB is. There is so much more that we wanted to cover about labor rights, about the challenges we're facing, but it was too much for tonight. We have lots of other stuff to talk about. So we will do a separate webinar, 1 hour long, where we only talk about what the NLRB is, what our rights are, and what's going on. All right, so I wanted to go over a few other changes that we're seeing that taken together amount to a radical reshaping of government. government where corporations have more power, where everyday people have less power. And if you feel like this sounds familiar, you are right. More than 2/3 of the proposals that we've seen in the last couple of weeks are straight out of Project 2025. Again, 2/3 of all the things we've seen coming at us are straight out of Project 2025. So I will go over some of the things that are relevant to us, but I want us all to keep in mind that all of this has nothing to do with eliminating wasteful spending or making government more efficient. We all want that. This ain't it. This has everything to do with making the 1% richer. All right, so in addition to the NLRB, there are a few other things that we should be aware of. So Nick already mentioned the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, that's responsible for protecting workers against discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, age, disability, and many, many other things. CWA uses the EEOC a lot. And what you see here on the screen is famously, Local 1180 won a long-standing EEOC case against the city of New York. And as a result, the city had to pay multi-million dollars in raises and back pay to city workers and many other damages. We also use the EEOC to get employers to provide reasonable accommodation for workers with disabilities. So similar to the NLRB, Trump fired the EEOC chair along with the EEOC's 3 commissioners, and he put a new acting chair in place. And just like the NLRB, the EEOC currently does not have quorum, cannot meet, effectively halting major actions like this, like at 1180, or issuing any new regulations and guidance. Another thing that we're keeping an eye on that we're concerned about is OSHA. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, part of the Department of Labor, and is responsible for keeping workplaces safe and healthy. As part of the Trump administration's regulatory freeze, a new OSHA rule that was just released on heat protection is currently suspended. Mind you, this comes on the heels of the most devastating fires we've seen in California, right? And this move puts potentially millions of workers at risk of heat-related illnesses and injuries. Heat is considered the leading cause of weather-related death on the job in America. And of course, Republicans in Congress have also introduced legislation to just completely abolish OSHA because they believe safety is best in the hand of the employers. And they've also introduced legislation to implement right to work. Now, they introduce these bills every year, but this might be the time they finally push this through. So we're keeping an eye on it. Again, I want us all to understand that all these attacks are a broad attack on established rules and norms and regulations, as Nick said, that we're not so super strong to begin with, right? We've been fighting for better labor laws all our lives. But now they're fundamentally trying to rewrite the rules for total government, corporate control in government. So this doesn't only happen through openly dismantling all these agencies, but also slowly and quietly underfunding, understaffing, and hollowing out already weak structures. This is death by 1,000 cuts. As Nick said, even in good times, the NLRB didn't really have what it needed. But CWA is fighting back. You may have seen it in the news. CWA joined several lawsuits together with the AFL-CIO and many other unions to not let them get away with it, right? They're just stretching out the rules, trying to see what they can get away with. Then there's a lawsuit, then they have to pull it back. And so we have to keep on it. Most prominently, we've filed an injunction against the Department of Labor and DOGE from having DOGE access internal systems at the Department of Labor. Because as you can imagine, we don't want them to have our personal data, right? We've all seen in the news what's happening. You know, the Doge Minion army marches into an agency, they lock all the computers, they change people's password, and then all of a sudden they have access to all kinds of sensitive data. So the Department of Labor has data that we all have, that has all of our data on benefits, claims that workers have made, workers' compensation, black lung claims, identities of workers who filed wage and hour safety complaints, and so on and so on. So do we trust Elon Musk and his minion army with our personal data? Hell no. But before I move on to talk about the various cuts we're facing, I also briefly wanted to mention the increasing attacks on journalists that we're seeing and the free press. I know we have a lot of our News Guild members on this call tonight, and we thank everybody for the important work that you're doing. We're very, very concerned with what we're seeing, right? You see more and more corporate owners of newspapers like Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post self-censoring, right? We see a lot of media outlets being banned from the White House because they might write something that you don't like. And these are all really, really dangerous things, right? You all know the saying, whoever controls the news shapes reality to control the people, right? They're just trying to create a reality where they can weaponize misinformation and disinformation to justify what they're doing. All right, but the area that we're monitoring probably the most, that you probably have a lot of questions about, are the various cuts that we're facing. Generally speaking, we are looking at two areas of cuts that have huge impact on CWA members. Number one, funding cuts through presidential action, and number two, the federal budget. This impacts us in two ways. Number one, straight up job losses, right? We represent a lot of government workers, but also researchers, healthcare workers, grad students who work in positions that are funded through government programs. Number two, this will just hurt all of us if you just look at the impact of these cuts, right? As people who might need innovative treatments for health issues that we have, or we have family members and loved ones who need treatments, innovative technologies. Shutting all these agencies down that have been working on this will hurt all of us. And if we have the power to do something about it, we got to do it. So let's start with the funding cuts through presidential action. Basically, every week we hear another agencies that they have their eyes set on, right? The biggest one that we've seen in the news is the National Institute for Health and the VA. And the way that they're doing is many different things. Remember, death by 1,000 cuts. So they're significantly reducing staff size by legally or illegally firing government workers. They're cutting funding for the agency to function, and they're cutting funding that these agencies are passing out. So the NIH and the VA are amongst the biggest funders of medical research in the world. Groundbreaking cancer treatments, we're talking innovative life-saving technologies, cracking the code for understanding Alzheimer's, heart diseases, all these things. This is something that we should be so proud of. America has been leading the world in literally creating miracles. A lot of that is on the line, and it's going to really impact a lot of us. Not even to mention the dismantling of the Department of Education, but that's a whole story for another day. We don't have enough time to talk about that, but we'll definitely look more into that. All right, so you may have heard that some other programs that we really care about are currently in limbo. We've talked a lot in the last couple of years about the biggest funding for broadband in our lifetime, right? The broadband package and the infrastructure package will be life-changing, transformative, biggest funding we've seen in a generation. That is currently in limbo. We don't really know what's going to happen with this. We're keeping an eye on it. I think one of the reasons why they haven't been able to completely shut it off is that a lot of red states benefit from this much more so than other states, right? And so again, trying to not hurt yourself too much is something that at the end of the day, a lot of folks care about. The same goes for CHIPS funding. Monumental funding because we represent a lot of workers in the semiconductor industry. Again, we don't know exactly what's going on. It's very, very concerning, and we're keeping an eye on it. Speaking of broadband, something that you've probably seen in the news yesterday is that the Federal Aviation Administration is close to canceling a almost $2.5 billion contract to overhaul a communication system and awarding the work to none other than, surprise, surprise, Elon Musk's Starlink. The existing contract was awarded to Verizon in 2023. So the news just broke yesterday. We'll see what happens. We're definitely very, very concerned and are monitoring this closely. But here's the trend I want all of us to pay attention to. If you follow the news closely, this follows a trend. While funding and programs are being slashed and halted on one side, certain government contracts, certain government programs are steered towards the very companies that these billionaires, who are some sort of unelected shadow government at this point, are all running. So if you just look at all the government contracts that Elon Musk has gobbled up in the last like 48 hours, $400 million funneled to Tesla, $38 billion in general that Elon Musk has in government contracts, loans, tax credits, and then the latest thing, potentially getting a $2.5 billion contract for Starlink. The same is true for Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and all these other billionaires who, lo and behold, look at this, in the last couple of weeks, got billions and billions of dollars richer. So again, this has all of this what's happening. They say, oh, this is to root out fraud and waste and abuse. This has nothing to do with that. We all want that, and there's a way to do that, and we should do that. But what's actually happening is a massive transfer of wealth to make the 1% even richer. So the second area that we're closely watching is the federal budget. By now, you probably all know that on Tuesday, the House passed a budget blueprint that includes $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, mostly huge cuts to billionaires. You probably notice a trend here. And in order to pay for that, they're targeting about $880 billion in Medicaid spending. The vote passed late on Tuesday by 2 votes along party lines. All right, so let's look at this. I know they're saying that everybody will benefit from these beautiful tax cuts. Everybody will get a tax cut. But if you look closely in actually what they put in writing, you will see that the top 5% and mostly the top 1% will benefit the most. That means the rest of us will not really benefit all that much, right? And so again, if you look closely, and this is in writing, you can read the House resolution. People who benefit the most are the top 1%. Here's another way to look at this. On the right side, you see tax cuts for 1.1 for the 1% to the tune of $1.1 trillion. How are they going to pay for this? They have to take it from Medicaid and other funding. So I know everybody says, oh, we're not going to touch Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. This is just everybody being hysterical. But if you look at the budget spending target, you'll see on the next slide, please, that if you want to hit $880 billion of cuts in the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, it's Medicaid, Medicare, other spending. And so there's not much else to cut from. It doesn't really add up unless you really significantly go into Medicaid and Medicare. So you might ask yourself, why should we care about Medicaid cuts? We're not on Medicaid. Well, if you ever needed healthcare, have to go to a hospital, this will affect you. Medicaid spending makes up a huge amount of all healthcare and hospital funding in all of our states. Medicaid keeps hospitals open and provides for quality care. Also, think about it this way. If you want to keep our strong healthcare in our contract, this will affect us. Over 21% or 83 million Americans are on Medicaid. What do you think is going to happen when this funding is cut? Healthcare prices will go up, and we all will have to pay for it in our next contract. And then state budgets. State budgets rely on a huge amount on Medicaid funding. So if that funding gets cut, there will be less for the rest of us. So if you look at all the things that Medicaid covers, it really impacts us a lot. And that's why we really should care about it. So, but don't just take it from me. Let's hear from some of our members. We have Sheldon Butler from Local 1040 here, who's going to talk about how these Medicaid funding cuts would impact us. Thanks for joining us tonight, Sheldon.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for inviting me. Hello, everyone, brothers and sisters. My name is Sheldon Butler, and I work at Ancor Psychiatric Hospital. I've been a member of CWA for over 17 years. I am a nurse by profession, and I direct the nursing education department at my facility. We make sure that our nurses are able to provide care for our most vulnerable population, patients who suffer with mental illness. What I hear from Washington worries me. I'm worried about losing my job. The people I work with are worried about losing their job. Can you imagine having a family, having bills to pay, losing your job, and with all the other responsibilities that you have? due to federal cuts. Every day, we hear about cuts to programs or defunding programs. This proposed budget if this proposed budget is approved, I can guarantee you more of us will lose our jobs. These cuts will dramatically affect how we provide services to our communities. Hospitals will close. Education, your kids' educations that they deserve will be cut. I've never been so worried about my job. I have children, and I fear as a father that I will not be able to provide for them. The American dream should apply to all of us, especially those who are average workers, especially that we are also entitled to this American dream. Let's stop this budget. Join me in this fight. Help us live out our dream. Because at CWA, when we fight, we win. Thank you.
Right on, Sheldon. Thank you so much. So the good news is Tuesday's vote was just the beginning. Now the House and the Senate, they have about 30 days to come to an agreement in a process that's called budget reconciliation. And I'm not going to bore you with all the details of what that means. We're going to put some links in the chat that have some explainers of what budget reconciliation is. But basically in the next 30 days, they kind of have to figure out how they can agree on a budget. And that gives us ample opportunities to let them all know that we're not okay with this and that we're going to fight back. There's also a briefing that many organizations that we work with will hold on the budget process. So if you're nerdy like me and really want to understand all the different steps that will get us to a final budget, please join that. So we have to keep up the fight. We're just getting started with this. Now they put into writing what they want. They put their names into it. We can go after that. And so now it's my honor to pass it on to our assistant to the vice president, Billy Gallagher, who will all let us know how to fight back.
Thank you, Haylin. It's good to be with you tonight, sisters and brothers. There's a lot going on, and most of it is not good, unfortunately. Now you're probably wondering, what, if anything, can we do about this? The good news is there's a lot we can do. The bad news is that it's going to be a really tough fight. But hey, that never stopped us from anything before. What we're going to give up now, we're not going to give up now. Remember, you lose 100% of the fights that you don't fight. There are 3 things we can start to do. Call your member of Congress, sign a petition against satellite broadband, and come out to a rally or protest. The first action, call your member of Congress. Let's hear from one of our healthcare members why that's important. We recorded this before Tuesday's vote, but the message is still the same.
Hi, my name is Molly Sass. I am an RN in an intensive care unit in Buffalo, New York. I am also a proud member of CWA Local 1168. We need your help. We need you to call your congressmen and encourage them to vote no on the House budget resolution. This budget proposes huge cuts to Medicaid, which would then fund tax cuts for the wealthy. A cut to Medicaid like this would be devastating to our most vulnerable patients. And it affects the workers too. A cut to Medicaid like that would make it impossible to bargain a contract that would have safe staffing levels. Safe staffing levels helps guarantee quality patient care. Call your congressman, ask them to vote no. Ask them to stand with nurses and stand with patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly, for doing that video for us. As Haylin said, we lost the battle, but the fight is not over. Over the next 30-something days, our members of Congress need to keep hearing from us. You have all seen the headlines that they're so annoyed that so many people are calling their offices. Well, here's the news. Those are the people that got you there. If your representative is a Democrat, tell them to fight harder. If your representative is a Republican, tell them not to cut our health care and tell them not to vote for this budget. Tomorrow, please call. Get your coworkers to make calls. Share the video on social media. We will share the links in the video, to the video in the chat, and after this call, we will share some more materials. Next up, to sign a petition. You all know about the massive broadband funding from the infrastructure package, and we talked about how this funding might be put on hold and how to watch out for Elon Musk and getting all of his money from for his Starlink satellite operations instead of a fiber broadband build out. That means that's work for CWA members did to ensure the funding goes towards reliable, high-speed fiber, and good jobs are in jeopardy. In the chat, we're sharing a flyer and a petition called on the NTIA to stand up to the pressure and ensure public funds continue to fund reliable fiber internet and good jobs. Please sign and share with your locals. And the last thing, sisters and brothers, we got to take it to the streets. Every week there are protests CWA and other union allies are holding to protest funding cuts or the blatant attacks on workers' rights. A few days ago, CWA stood in solidarity with postal workers. Next, there's a National Day of Action to fight against the attacks on our public education. And we're joining actions in Albany and in Newark. On March 15th, there will be a huge rally in New York City to protest the cuts. We will share the information as timely as we get it. And if you can, please mobilize your members and come out. We have to stand together. We have to fight back. Thank you. And I will pass it back to Kim.
All right. Thank you, Billy. All right, everyone. This was jam-packed. We told no tales. We did not tell a lie. This was a jam-packed agenda. I hope you all learned something, some things you did not know. And I hope you learned as much as I did tonight. Before we close this out, we have 2 questions we're going to pose to you. We have a Zoom poll. So there are 2 questions in our Zoom poll, and they are as follows. Which issue do you want us to do an educational webinar on? And you'll have choices there. What is the National Labor Relations Board and why it is important? What is the deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion? Why is Medicaid important to us? What's the deal with Social Security and Medicare? Media literacy. So you all are voting. Vote on that. That's question number 1. And there's an other spot. We're going to have a second question too. So this one is loading up. Our second question is going to be about our actual call. And we just want you to kind of rate and tell us how useful this call was to you. And you'll see the choices for that as well. And there's going to be 3 choices for the second question. And very useful is 1, medium useful, or meh. So you let us know how you feel about this call and if it was useful to you or not. That'll be the second question. Make sure everyone's doing the poll out here. All right. So once we're done with the poll, I'm going to be handing it over again. Some people are saying the poll, let's see. Here's question number 2. Come on, people. Tell us how useful this call was. Okay, most people are saying very useful. All right, this is looking good here. All right, so far it's an overwhelming, very useful. I'm loving this. Keep on voting. There's still time to vote. All right, it may be taking a minute to load for some people, but it's there. All right, so far, very useful is number 1. So as was stated in the chat, we are taking note of what was in the chat and questions, and if there's things that have not been answered, we're going to try to circle around and get to them privately, or we will get back to you. So it looks like the poll is starting to wrap up. All right. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you for taking this poll. So what I'm going to do, I did my part. You did your part. I'm going to hand it back to Dennis to close us out. You heard everything you needed to hear from me tonight. And thank you all for coming. Dennis, it's up. You are up again.
Kim, thank you very much for doing what you did tonight. We appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And over, 98% of you stayed on for the whole call, which is great. As Billy said, we're going to have a lot of rallies. There's going to be a lot of notices. We're going to be doing a lot of things in the district with your locals. We'll be sending out notices when there are rallies. Try joining us at a rally. Get involved. Get your family involved. These cuts are happening. They're happening to all of us, okay? Someone in your family is going to be affected one way or other with the programs that are being cut. So we all have to get involved. Billy said it. Call your congressman tomorrow. Get involved. Tell them what you want. Tell them that you're tired of these cuts. You want them to, if they're a Democrat, tell them to get more involved. If they're a Republican, tell them that you're not going to stand for these cuts. So the big thing is get involved. Come to a rally. See us. And we're going to have more of these town halls. We're going to keep the conversation going with our members and with our locals, and talk to your other members that may not have been on the call tonight. Encourage them to be at the next one. Tell them what you heard tonight. We appreciate everything that everybody does, and CWA is strong. We're going to stay strong and get involved. Thanks, everyone, and good night.